I kind of went from overnight being major Sally Orange to just being Sally.
I think we're all a product of our experiences. Through adversity, it really pushes us in the direction to make it a force for good.
You wouldn't learn to swim in a storm. So why do we wait with our mental health until we're at a point of crisis?
And there's that shame around it. Oh, it's a weakness to feel like this.
We're often very good at giving help to other people, but we just are not very good at receiving it.
Like, speaking up is a huge, brave and courageous thing in itself, and people don't give that enough credit.
Movement is medicine. Both cancer and mental illness are invisible. So on the outside, I looked unwell, yet my body physically undertook a 50k ultramarathon dressed as a giant boob.
And I do think the younger generation are better at talking about feelings.
I would never talk to anybody else the way that my head talks to myself. The identity isn't something that you lose particularly. It's actually something that you evolve. How can people help you if they don't know that there's a problem?
What does it take to rebuild yourself when everything you've known is suddenly taken away? On this episode of P.S I Love Me, I'm joined by Sally Orange MBE, mental health campaigner, endurance athlete, and former British Army major who campaigns about the realities of suffering from mental illness. After 22 years serving in the Royal Army Medical Corps, including being deployed in Afghanistan, Sally was medically discharged due to mental illness. This really forced her to rebuild her identity from the ground up, and instead of hiding, she chose the opposite. Since then, Sally has run over 85 marathons across 7 continents, often dressed as a fruit, to spark the conversations many people are still afraid to have. And she's the only person in the world to have run a marathon on every continent dressed as a different piece of fruit, using humour as a powerful tool to challenge stigma and mental health, making it more visible, accessible, and impossible to ignore. A multiple Guinness World Record holder and MBE recipient for services to charity and mental health, Sally has raised over £1 million for more than 50 charities. And now, facing a breast cancer diagnosis, she continues to show up with the same courage and candour that really has defined her work. So if you've ever felt like you're holding it together from the outside whilst falling apart on the inside, this conversation is for you. Let's dive in with Sally Orange.
Oh, thank you, Lynda. That's so kind of you.
So you were in the army for 22 years. That's an enormous period of time. And at the end of those years, you were medically discharged for mental illness, essentially overnight. And you lost your career, and you've also said your identity. Can you tell me a little bit more about what happened in that aftermath and those days following that?
Yes. Well, again, thank you for that lovely introduction. And 22 years in the Royal Army Medical Corps as a physiotherapy officer. I reached the ranks of major. So I started off as a private soldier, and through time reached the ranks of major. And often when I tell people that I was medically discharged for mental illness, they make the assumption that it's PTSD, that it's post-traumatic stress disorder, especially when they hear that I've been to Afghanistan. And it's not, it wasn't, it was depression and chronic anxiety. And in actual fact, Afghanistan gave me a real sense of purpose. It's what I trained for. It's what I, really thrived at when I was out there. So there's, first of all, that misconception that is often because you've been in the military, it must be PTSD. But the military and the army is not just a job as such. It's sort of like your identity, your purpose, your community, all sort of wrapped up in this uniform. And I kind of went from overnight being major Sally Orange to just being Sally. And that was really, really difficult. I'd already found myself at rock bottom, and the way to sort of try and build myself, I was thinking, well, I've got a job that I love, real purpose there. But then that to be taken away, that was incredibly, incredibly tough. But then I kind of realized that identity isn't something that you lose particularly. It's actually something that you evolve. And I'm still the same person, but I now serve and support other people in a different way. So it's sort of given me the springboard really to use the adversity that I've gone through and almost give me a stronger purpose with what I do. So yes, it has been incredibly difficult. It hasn't sort of been something that I got over as soon, as soon as it happened. It did take a long time. It took a lot of therapy. But now I'm in a much better place. But I think for so long I hid it. And that didn't do me any favors, because how can anyone help you if they don't know that there's anything wrong? Often we feel that we're the only person and we don't want to tell anyone because we think everybody else is living this amazing life. Social media doesn't help with that. Yet, since I've been open about it, I've had so many other people feel that they can open up about it to me. And I've realized there are so many people struggling. And it doesn't have to be, the military. It can be, family life. It can be, divorce. It can be business. So many things that people can struggle with. But you're not alone. There's so many other people in that situation.
And I think there's a couple of things to that when it comes to identity, going back with what you were saying about how the outside world perceives us in our view, but like you were saying, going back to your core values, what's really inside of you, the outside world and the outside performance and the external validation of the army and the incredible work you did. But you still, as you say, you're still the same person inside. And you're still in service. You're still in service to people, but just now in a different way and perhaps a more impactful way.
I was very lucky that not long after I was medically discharged, I was asked by the Army Cadet Force to become their national ambassador. So it was really strange to have gone from one organisation that had sort of said, you're not good enough, in my mind, to another organisation that almost championed the fact that I was open about the struggles with my mental health. It was just, really was one door closed, another one open. And they were sort of, they're almost cousins of the same organisation. So I got to put that uniform on and be there to be able to show young people that it is okay to talk about how you're feeling. And in actual fact, if you get help sooner, then it can help you. And I always say to people that you wouldn't learn to swim in a storm. So why do we wait with our mental health until we're at a point of crisis? I certainly was.
And it's like if you cut yourself, you don't just let it bleed and bleed and bleed until you're literally on life support. But because you can't see it, it's brushed under the carpet, and there's that shame around it. Oh, it's a weakness to feel like this, or I don't want to burden other people, especially when you're always in service to other people, whether that's the mom that's running the show, that's working full time, that has 2 kids, that's sorting all the household out, that's everyone to everything to everyone. But when it comes to asking for help, a lot of people find that really, really difficult. They find it really difficult to receive help as well.
Yes, I think we're often very good at giving help to other people, but we just are not very good at receiving it. But actually, if you think about how you feel when you help someone else, you feel good. So I've kind of reframed it in thinking that if I need to ask for help, it's giving the opportunity to somebody else to feel good about themselves, which I know that sounds a little bit strange, but I think that can help you in your mind think, well, this is me helping someone else feel good about themselves.
Yeah, brilliant reframe.
Like you say with the cut finger, we often, so many people are trained to be able to deliver CPR, in the hope that they will never need to use it. And it needs to be the same with our mental health, that we learn the tools and techniques when we feel well, so that if they are needed to be used, either on ourselves or, on a loved one, then we know what to do, because there's nothing worse than being in that situation and suddenly kind of flapping, going, I don't know what to do here now. So, if we looked at physical health, if we looked at mental health the same way as we did physical health, we would have we'd be in a lot better place, I think.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why you've run 85 marathons dressed as a fruit, to really make it more accessible to talk about mental health. Where did all that start? It's absolutely amazing looking at your pictures in the most fabulous settings, dressed in all sorts of different fruits and vegetables. It's incredible. Where did that start from?
Yeah, I mean, it almost came from the illness in itself that as part of being unwell, I had to find a way of getting out of bed, and that didn't start with getting out of bed and going to run for a marathon. It was getting out of bed and having a shower, getting out of bed and walking to the end of the garden, because movement is medicine. And, that's something that if we can all, again, take away that when we're feeling good, it's easier for when we're not feeling so good. And I'd always wanted to run a marathon. I remember watching the London Marathon when I was 7 years old on TV and thinking, wow, that looks amazing. I want to do that. But it took me until I was 34 till I plucked up the courage to kind of think, yeah, I can do this. So I did the very first one dressed as a superhero. And I remember crossing that finish line and just feeling like an absolute superhero. And then thinking, I want to do that again. And because my surname being Orange, I thought, oh, I'll do it dressed as a piece of fruit. I'll do it as an orange. And I got the Guinness World Record for the fastest marathon dressed as a piece of fruit. And after that, I was away with the army, and I thought, oh, I was with the US Marine Corps, and so I did the US Marine Corps marathon dressed as a watermelon. And I kind of thought, oh, I've done a few marathons in different places now. But what I found was that people smiled and they came up to you and they were like, why are you dressed as an apple, orange, banana, or, whatever it is? And I said, I realized that it made an impact and it got people talking. So I'd done those couple of marathons before I'd been really unwell. And so I remember thinking back, you've done hard things before. So why don't you aim to do another marathon? And that's sort of where it started, really. And then, yes, it literally has taken me all around the world to do 7 continents. And I even did one event where it was 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 consecutive days. So yeah,
Wow.
a real challenge.
But you're right, it does provide that conduit to open that conversation. It's a conversation starter, it provides humour, and it's almost like that bridge to be able to talk about it. And I think humour is so underrated in today's world. It really is.
Yeah, people do. They'll sort of, they'll smile, and if I'd got a T-shirt on saying "Come and talk to me about mental health," that would maybe get the people who are happy to talk about their mental health to come and talk to me. But the great thing about the fruit is nobody knows what it's necessarily, about. And mental illness doesn't discriminate. So it could be that person who is struggling inside, but externally is, I was that person. I was, looked like I was fun, bubbly, happy, but inside it was a very, very different story. And it's great to be able to catch those people with the fruit, or even if they identify and say maybe it's not them that's struggling, but it might be a family member. Or, I've had people say, my daughter's struggling. I don't know what to do. Can you give me any advice? So it's the way that it's able to get to, lots of different people, men, women, boys, girls, children. And it's a great way to sort of really address it with children and emotions and talking about things, because if they're taught that from a young age, then, it just becomes the norm.
Yeah. And I do think the younger generation are better at talking about feelings. I mean, I see that in the younger generation with my godkids and nephews. It's not so foreign to them. And I think there's a lot more help than when we were young, 30, 40 years ago. It's wildly different now. And I do find it's the older generation that seem to have more of a stigma around it these days, because it's, the modeling from our parents and what people weren't educated on back then. I learned that with my father's death as well, which we'll get into in a little bit later on. But it is that the stigma is less now. There's a lot more awareness, thanks to people like you who campaign for this through what you do through your marathons, but also a lot of the speaking opportunities that you do month on month, year on year as well. When you go to organizations, what are your general topics that you speak on that you find really hit home?
So some of it is just the lived experience of the military, and of mental illness, and more recently a cancer diagnosis, as well. And I think of those different topics, it's not often that there's no one in the room who hasn't been either hit by cancer or mental illness. One in two of us is going to struggle with cancer at some point in our lives, and one in four will struggle with mental illness. I just was a bit greedy and decided to go for both of them. And the other thing is that, a cancer diagnosis for a lot of people impacts their mental health. So it really does resonate with a lot of people. I know that, I know quite a few speakers who have lost limbs because of being in the military. And whilst to an audience they can be very inspirational because of what they've gone on to achieve, the audience doesn't necessarily resonate with them because they have two legs, or they have both of their arms. But I think with the topics that I talk about, it doesn't have to be the extremes of, suicide. It can just be not feeling 100% for quite a long time. And I think that resonates with people, and it's giving the tools and the techniques and, just the ways that I've been able to overcome that can hopefully help other people. And it's really not a competition of, well, I was worse than that, or, my biggest dream is that I wouldn't need to be speaking on stage, because it would mean that nobody was suffering with cancer or with their mental health. But I don't think in my lifetime I'm going to ever find myself out of a job, with those things. But yeah, it's really about resonating with the audience, and as I said before, whether it be themselves or a partner or, a child or a sibling, we're often striving and wanting to help somebody else. So even if we're not the person struggling, how do we help the other person? So it can hit in lots of different ways, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, stories of resilience, and you're an absolute living, breathing example of resilience. But that word does get thrown around quite a lot. It can have a bit of toxic positivity, connotations as well. But what does resilience look like to you? I mean, when you got your breast cancer diagnosis, you must have thought, what the fuck? Seriously? I mean, it's allowing yourself to feel those feelings first before you start building yourself up again. But tell me what that has looked like for you.
I mean, I think resilience, as you say, I think it's quite often misunderstood in some ways. I think a lot of people think of it being toughness, of continuing, whatever, keeping going, whatever. But not showing any of the weakness. But for me, I think it's more about being honest when you are struggling. And it's also about the way that you can bounce back from things. And when I got my cancer diagnosis, I almost used the struggles that I'd had with my mental health as the building blocks to be able to get through it. So I'd been through tough things before. I had been rock bottom. But so the cancer diagnosis didn't floor me as much as my mental illness had. And I think it's really interesting because both cancer and mental illness are invisible. Unless you've had chemotherapy and lost your hair, which is why mine is just growing back. But when I was completely bald, it was, a red flag. She's ill. She's got cancer, or had cancer. But you wouldn't have known that had I have not had chemo. And I know some people who have had chemo who didn't lose their hair, who also found it quite difficult because people thought they were really well. Now, I was also a little bit strange in that I managed to run an ultramarathon while I was going through chemotherapy treatment. So on the outside, I looked unwell, yet my body physically undertook a 50K ultramarathon dressed as a giant boob. And also I trekked up to Everest Base Camp dressed as a giant boob, and then took on the Everest Marathon with cancer. So
Wow.
it's, it's quite strange that to look at, I perhaps didn't look very well, but physically I was capable. And the strange thing was, it was the time when I had hair and I did the Everest Marathon that I had cancer. When I did the ultramarathon through chemo, the cancer had been removed. I was just then having the treatment that is hoping that it won't reoccur and won't come back again. But I looked more unwell than when I actually had it. So, it's really true that you don't judge a book by its cover.
Yeah, appearances can be deceptive, and we assume, especially as high achieving women, when they put their makeup on and do their hair in the morning and put that brave face on into work, into family life, quite often masking what's really going on deep down, and people assume that they're okay. And quite often these women are the brave ones who are holding it all together for everyone else, where they're the ones that need the most help. And it is, when you look at, when you're just going back to what you were saying about resilience, it is having that bravery and courage to speak up. Like, speaking up is a huge, brave and courageous thing in itself, and people don't give that enough credit. Like putting their hand up and say, I'm struggling here, I need some help.
Yeah, and I think that, it's honesty, really. That's what it comes down to. People can say, "Oh, it's very brave," but again, if you reframe that to just being honest, who wouldn't want to be honest? Who wouldn't want to be honest in life? And we don't see that quality as a negative thing. So, why not just be honest with your friends and family about how you're feeling? Yeah, and I've learned a lot about how you can reframe certain situations. I know that a cancer diagnosis, it's a challenge, but with challenge comes opportunity. And I've seen so many opportunities and doors that have opened because of this diagnosis that never would have done before. Now, I'm not saying everybody's going to be there putting their hand up saying, "Oh, I can't wait to get cancer." But I remember with my mental illness looking back, and I know this sounds really strange, but I so wanted to not be here. I so wanted to be dead that I actually almost wished that I had cancer, because that way I could go. The outcome would be the same, but I wouldn't have anyone else blaming themselves or thinking, what could they have done any different? I really was at that point, when I wanted to take my own life, that it was just a way of, trying to get me out of here and no longer having to put up with what my brain was telling me. Um, so yeah, it's quite interesting having then found myself with cancer, and it being a totally different situation scenario. I mean, the externally people, when I said I'd got cancer, I'd got flowers, I'd got cards, I'd got, people coming round. I didn't have any of that when I was really, really rock bottom. And actually with cancer, right from the beginning, I told myself, okay, cancer, you're here, but you're doing this on my terms. As in, all of my appointments, they could fit around my life rather than my life fitting around the appointments, within reason. But I ran to all my cancer, all my chemo sessions, and yeah, I sort of didn't let it take over as such. I didn't want to become a victim to it, I guess it was, and I think that stood me in good stance to be able to move forward with it.
If you love PSI Love Me and truly want change in love and life, then join the Evolve Woman programme, my 12-week online coaching journey, which will take you on a transformative experience of self-discovery to find the joy, connection and deep love you so deserve. Just go to lindawilliamscoaching.com to find out more. And thank you for sharing so honestly about you not wanting to be here. And if I may ask a little bit more about that, and just a trigger warning to our listeners, I will be asking some open questions around suicide. So if you've been affected by that recently, please step away for a few minutes if you need to. You're on the board of a suicide prevention charity. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Did that come from when you didn't want to be here?
Yeah, I did get to that place where I just didn't feel that there was a place on this earth for me. And I thought that the world would be a lot better off without me. I felt a huge burden. Um, but I've since then learned a lot about the impact of suicide on the wider people around you. And I have a very different view to it now. I still understand why people are at that point. People, as you say, people feel that they have to hold it together and look as though everything okay. And, I think, again, unfortunately, most people know of someone who has taken their life, be it somebody that they're close to or a famous person. I think Robin Williams is one of the people that, was fun on the outside, but underneath and inside was absolutely crippled. Um, and it is that point that mental illness doesn't discriminate. So many of us could feel like that. But I think it was the doctor that I remember going to see not long after. And for me, I lived near a train track, and it was going to, I'd got it planned. It was going to be, a train. And he said to me, what about the impact that would have had on the driver and all the other passengers? And that had never entered my head. I had never thought that anybody else would be affected. So, it wasn't just one person no longer being here. It was potentially hundreds, and if not further, thousands of people who would be affected by this. But I didn't have that education. I didn't know that. And I think if I'd have known that, it would automatically be a case of, well, I don't want to hurt anybody else. I'll go and get the help. But I saw it as being much easier for everyone, that I was no longer a burden. I was difficult to be, I was crying all the time. People don't know what to do with someone when they're crying a lot of the time, and particularly in the army, they didn't know what to do with someone who was crying. And crying for me is an emotion that comes out whether I'm happy, sad, angry, tired. It's just, I don't go and punch a wall. I don't go and punch somebody else. Like, it was sort of okay I say okay, it was understood that was just somebody letting out their frustration. Whereas for me, it was tears, and that became very misunderstood in that environment. So yeah, I'm now very, very passionate that I don't ever want anyone else to find themselves in the situation that I found myself in. And I think just that education of the impact it could have on others can allow someone to sort of home in and go, okay, I'll help myself with the help of professionals, to not be in that place anymore.
Yeah, because I think when you do get in that dark spot, when you just feel like there's no other option, there's no way out of the situation you are in or the way that you feel, then that's when you start thinking about that route to go down. And yeah, number one, getting the help, speaking up, even if it's a close friend, of being open and vulnerable too, or speaking for getting professional help. But number two, importantly, yeah, how it will impact everyone else. We spoke about before this call, my father passed away when I was 18 due to suicide. And it does have a huge ramification on the family that you leave. There's so many unanswered questions, and the grief cycle looks wildly different to losing someone to suicide, because there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of anger, a lot of sadness, a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of, could I be in a better person? They'd still stick around. So it's all encompassing when someone passes in this way. And it's why I've been so passionate about mental health over the last 27 years now. And my mission is to help other women feel really good about themselves through the work I do. So I think we're all a product of our experiences. Through adversity, it really pushes us in the direction to make it a force for good, essentially.
Yeah, and what a brilliant job you're doing with with that, sort of empowering people and just changing the spotlight, because I think we have a different view of ourselves than how other people see us. How often do people say, I wish you could see yourself the way that everybody else sees you? And you're just refocusing that different spotlight so that somebody can see what they're doing rather than the one that they're putting themselves, which is quite often negative. One thing I learned through therapy was I would never talk to anybody else the way that my head talks to myself. And actually we need to learn to talk to ourselves as though we would do one of our friends. But I think something that you said before, opening up to a close friend, I think also sometimes it's easier just to open up to somebody you don't know at all. So that's why, things like Samaritans is incredible. I've used Samaritans on a number of occasions and know that they've saved my life. And it's just somebody there at the end of the phone. And so that's knowing that you are never, ever alone. That phone line is there, 24/7, 365 days a year, thanks to incredible volunteers. And that's usually volunteers who have found themselves in a situation where somebody else has taken their life. So they have that understanding. And I think if we know that, just sometimes that refocus of somebody who we don't know saying, oh, just listening, just letting you get it out. Because it might be that you don't want somebody at work to know, you don't want your boss to, don't want your boss to know. But I go back to that. How can people help you if they don't know that there's a problem?
And a lot of it can be around self-worth. I'm not worthy enough, right? And it's a lot of the work that I do and what you do. And that's different to the confidence and self-esteem. As we were both good at our jobs on the front, in Afghanistan, brilliant physiotherapists, absolutely killing it and looking after all those people. And I was similar in my PR agency days of confidence and self-esteem can go up and down, but your self-worth is kind of underneath that surface. It's that subconscious fault line that sometimes when we've had experiences that have negatively impacted that. For me, it was my father's suicide, the end of my marriage, really mean words on the playground growing up because I looked like a boy and I didn't have any fashion sense, and that actually stick in your subconscious without you knowing. And then you start looking at external validation to make yourself feel validated and enough of amazing careers, doing well, the VIP titles and the amazing bank account and all the things that make you look like you're worthy enough. And really the question is going back to some of those times in life where that self-worth cup may have been drained and exploring that and looking at, well, I understand why it was, but I didn't really have the tools then to understand why it shouldn't have been drained, because it shouldn't have been drained in that instance. It was that external experience or person that didn't have any right over me to make me feel less than. So quite often there's a lot of work to be done around our worth. And I love talking about this because I'm always wanting people's self-worth cups to be boosted, because so much is possible. And from everything from healthier relationships with ourselves first and foremost, but with partners and friends and family, and also in the workplace. So it's such a fascinating, quite deep topic.
Absolutely, and they all impact on each other, because how you feel about yourself impacts relationships, which impacts work. So they're all tied into each other. So yeah, it is fabulous work that you do, and it's not easy. It's not easy for you as the coach, and neither is it for the the client or the individual who's having to do these deep dives that they probably don't want to do, because we don't want to see what we think as negatives. But actually, if you go back to the thinking of a challenge as an opportunity, yes, it is a challenge having to uncover the deep things, but it's a real opportunity to grow and change and be that person that you want to be.
Absolutely. And so from all your experience, your incredible courage and resilience, and going through all these struggles, what are some of the things that have helped move the needle for you in terms of uplifting, making a change with your mental health? Obviously, the running, moving is medicine, speaking to someone, whether that's picking up the phone to the Samaritans, but what are some of the other things that have really helped bring more joy and lightness into your life when you've been going through hard times?
So I suppose if I look back to the cancer diagnosis, that was only a year ago, and I could have, somebody said, "Oh, your year's on hold." They'd been through breast cancer and said it would sort of take a year of treatment. So I didn't look at the year at all. I just completely broke it down, and I almost saw it as a triathlon. I'd done a couple of Ironmans in the past, and unfortunately for me, a few months before I was diagnosed, my dad was also diagnosed with terminal esophageal cancer. And I went along to all of his chemotherapy sessions with him. So I now look back at that and go, well, that was my training. I knew sort of what to expect. I'd seen somebody else go through it. So when I got my own diagnosis, I was able to sort of think, okay, well, Dad's been there. I know what to expect. It's going to be this and that. But while I was, given the diagnosis and then told that I would need surgery, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, I wasn't looking at the radiotherapy at the time when I was diagnosed. I was like, okay, I'll get my marathon done on Everest. That's what I want to do. I'll do the London Marathon. I'll get them. And I actually said, I took control and said to the consultant, I really want to do these things. Will it be detrimental? And we came to an agreement that some of the things that I'd got planned, I could still do. And some of them I wasn't going to be able to do. So it was a bit of bargaining. So I then had the surgery, went back to life of sort of doing a couple of things that I'd still got in the diary. And then it was the chemotherapy. And I tried to make it fun. And I know that might sound really, really strange, but I turned up to each chemotherapy session in different t-shirts, or, the first time I went dressed as a giant boob. So I'd sit there in the chair, as a giant boob. And a friend had bought me a t-shirt around Halloween that had got two bees around your boobs, and they'd got ghost costumes on, and that was check your boobies, and another, don't forget to check your pumpkins for lumpkins, and it was about seeing the opportunities that I could have that I would never have had, the people that I was going to meet. I've met some incredible people, and it was really sort of looking for those silver linings in this difficult situation. And then it got to the radiotherapy. And I actually decided with the radiotherapy that every session, I had 15 sessions, and I turned up to every one dressed as a different fruit or vegetable. And I remember sitting in the waiting room dressed as a sweet corn. And a few chief execs came round, and I just sat and waved. They were sort of like, what's that sweet corn sitting in the waiting room? And the radiographer taking me through and saying, we've looked through the camera and thought that we've got a sweet corn sitting there. Well, the next day I thought, do you know what? I'll take a couple of costumes with me. And I ended up getting a couple of other patients in the waiting room dressed up as a chili pepper and a carrot. And I hadn't realised that one of the patients, it was actually his first treatment. And he went in for treatment, and I waited for him to come out. I said, I'm so sorry. It isn't usually like this. I hadn't realised that this was your first treatment. He said, can I just say thank you? He said, you've made this so much easier, because I was really quite anxious, didn't know what to expect. He said, but you took all of that away from me by having fun. And that was a really nice feeling. And the photos are brilliant of, just sort of seeing, they were quite elderly, the other patients. But yeah, so now that finished 4 weeks ago, the radiotherapy. And so, yeah, I'm now just sort of, I'm going on to the hormone therapy part of it, which is almost like the glory lap. So I just saw it as an Ironman triathlon and broke it down, I think is the key message, that wasn't looking at the year that I got ahead, but I was just looking at each segment, which is quite of, as a fruit, you got to look at different segments or, different slices, and just broke it down to make it more manageable.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it, breaking it down, and also try to be in the present. I know a lot of us look to the future, that we wish our time away, but you were mindfully choosing those moments to find the silver linings and to find the humor. And I think humor is a big strand of our conversation today about how powerful humor can be, and finding that lightness and making other people laugh. Because when you were saying earlier about how good you feel when you help someone else, but you also feel really good when you make other people laugh too.
Yeah, and a smile is the best thing, it's one of the best ways that you can dress yourself, isn't it? You're so much more approachable if you're smiling. And actually, I learned from when I was really unwell mentally, there are times when if you do smile, you can give yourself positive thoughts. At the stage, it takes a lot of work. I'm not saying that happens overnight, but a little bit like how we put makeup on to make ourselves feel better. And sometimes that can be masking things, and we can not feel as good as we actually feel. But sometimes it can be the catalyst that makes us go, do you know what? I'm okay now. I can, enjoy this. And how often have we been to things where we can tell ourselves we're not going to enjoy something, and we get there? Oh, actually, I really quite enjoyed that. It wasn't what I expected, and it was different. But I think it's just being open to change and open to those opportunities.
Yeah, so much great advice. So, if you're not feeling okay, number one, speak to somebody, speak to a professional, pick up the phone. Number two, movement is medicine, as we've seen, whether that's just a walk in the park or walking to the end of the garden like you did in the early days, which ended up being 85 marathons, but amazing to see how far you've come, literally how far you've come. And number three, seeing the lightness, seeing the silver linings. Number four, the humor. Humor is also medicine, and trying to see the not the toxic positivity, but the funny side of moments, and making other people smile, and how wonderful that is.
Exactly that. It doesn't have to be a marathon. And in fact, for me, the reason I dress up as well is it takes that pressure off having to be a certain time. Or, so often people will say to me, I'll say I'm dressing as a nut, or dressing as an orange or banana. And they'll say, oh, what time are you going for? Just think, do you really think I'm not Mo Farah? I'm not going for, the fastest time. And I just say the time of my life, because that is a way of being able to, again, reframe it that I'm in control if I have a good time. I give myself the thinking, you're going to smile all the way around this. I can do that. Whereas I can't control if the weather's bad, if, somebody runs in front of me, if I can't control other people, which there are thousands within the marathon, but I can control how I think. And if my thinking isn't focused all about time, it just takes that pressure away, and nobody's necessarily thinking that I'm going for a time. So yeah, but that can be the same on a walk, of just thinking, okay, my intention on this walk is to not look at my phone. Because it really frustrates me that you be on a walk, somebody walks into you because they're just looking at their phone rather than looking ahead. But actually go for a walk with the intention of looking round and noticing something that you've never noticed before. So yeah, I think, they're the different things that you can build these strategies into. It doesn't have to be, a marathon. It really doesn't. And that's where people think it can be superhuman. But when they realize the understanding that actually the fruit and the costumes are there to take away that superhuman element, is just to completely normalize it and show that anybody can cover the distance of a marathon if they want to. And the reason I say that is because if a friend, a family member, a loved one is 26.2 miles away, and if they're struggling, I often say to people, would you get there? And people say, well, of course I would. I said, there's no trains, planes, cars, bikes. You can only get there on foot. Yeah, I'll get there. And that's how I believe that if people wanted to and had to and needed to, they would be able to complete the distance of a marathon.
Yeah, I remember you telling that to me in our phone call a couple of weeks ago, and I immediately recalled that to my partner because he's an amazing runner, and I'm always struggling. I bought all the gear, no idea, the the on running shoes that I've worn 3 times, and I really want to be a runner. And when you gave me that advice, I was like, oh my God, it's actually so simple, but so effective and such a great mindset hack when it comes to running. Like, if you had to get there, you would, of course you would. I think it is taking that pressure off, that pressure that we always put on ourselves to achieve, to do the thing. We have to do it in this time. But just showing up in the first place with the intent to make it enjoyable, to have the time of your life, is a completely different outlook to, oh, I have to do it in this time, otherwise I'll be a failure. Otherwise, what is the point of completing this? It's a complete mindset shift in terms of I'm enjoying it and being in the present, and I'm having the time of my life. What great advice.
And so often it's other people that will say, "What time are you going for?" They've never even ran a marathon. They don't know. They've heard that this 4 hours is the time to, you're a good runner if you're under 4 hours or not. They've never even done it themselves, and it doesn't really matter to them. They don't know what that actually means or feels like. So give it make it about you, and what you want to get out of it. And if that's seeing a friend, supporting, again, I look for all the different signs and I sort of think, oh, that's a good sign, or, they've been easy to spot. And I just give myself different things to think about rather than the miles that I've still got to go. And again, looking at it as how lucky are we to have the opportunity to be able to do this? Not, I've got to do this or I'm nervous about it. I know so many people who would love to be able to run a marathon, but they don't have legs. They found other ways.
No, you're right. And it comes back to being grateful about the small things, of being able to do the things that a lot of people can't do. And sometimes that's the mundane things of being able just to walk and to breathe and to buy nutritious food, and some of the simple things we forget, and going back to being present in that moment. You're talking about the phones. The golf masters have recently been on, and I think it's one of the only sports that you're not allowed a mobile phone at. And they had all the comparison shots of other sports. So they had all the finals masters shots, no mobile phones. And then there were shots going into the NBA football finals when, say, Messi scores a goal, and literally it's just a sea of iPhones, and they're just focused on capturing it rather than living that moment and taking it all in. It was just such a fascinating contrast of where we are today with not being present, not being connected to the moment, because we're always distracted on doing other things or thinking about the future, where it's, our life is here now. This moment is our life, and don't let that run away with you, and appreciate the smaller things. And I think, gratitude journaling has been widely talked about, and people are like, oh, I roll journaling. But I found one of the things that has helped me massively when I've had low periods, and I'm so on and off with this. I wish I would be one of those perfect meditators journaling my diary every morning, but I'm not. But and I've also said to one of my girlfriends, if anything ever happens to me, go and burn all my journals and gratitude. But the gratitude journal has helped me massively, just writing 5 things that I'm really grateful for each morning before I pick my phone up, before I get on my laptop. It really just helps rewire my brain for the day, and uplifts me and put things into perspective. I mean, I used to write things like, especially like in COVID as well, when I was in Singapore, and it was tough going out there with all the restrictions. It's like, I've got fresh running water. I can afford really nutritious food. I can afford to go to all these amazing exercise clubs and tennis clubs. I love my mom. I've got amazing friends and family. And it was all those things that help lift me up every day without it being toxic positivity. But it was more like, okay, putting just a bit of perspective and space around how I was feeling. And that massively helped me too.
I would challenge you there with your thoughts of burn those gratitude diaries if, when, because I
Well,
would
it's
say,
more the
how
journal in the back of it.
yeah, well, yeah, because how helpful could that be to other people to see the little things that they don't realize they're grateful for? I didn't realize that I would be so grateful for eyelashes until I lost them all. And then, I mean, there was bits where I was like, oh, I'm saving money on mascara, but you don't realize how eyelashes make you feel, or eyebrows, how they make you feel, and hair. So what we don't realize, and so a gratitude diary during difficult times would be very different to one just during a normal
Normal day.
day. But yeah, it really was something. But again, I came up with the positives of going, well, you don't need shampoo, you don't need to use your hair dryer. I haven't used a hairdryer in 7 or 8 months. I don't have to carry straighteners when I go somewhere. So yeah, there are different parts to it, and I've even done a sort of series of cancer silver linings, because there have been so many good things that have come out of it, that I never expected or thought at the beginning. So yeah, so keep going with the gratitude. But yeah, I see what you're saying. Maybe the journal behind it.
Oh, so many words of wisdom, Sally. I'm so grateful for you to be on the podcast today. And as we wrap up, what's one thing that you hope our listeners will take away from your story today?
Don't know if I've got just one, because there would be one essential, if it's mainly women that are your listeners. Check yourselves. With the breast cancer, just know your body, but also that you wouldn't learn to swim in a storm. So look after yourself now, so that if you find yourself in that storm, you know what to do and help yourself get out of it, rather than waiting until it's there. Because when I was at crisis point, I couldn't manage all the information that was coming in that was supposed to be there to help me, because I was so anxious and so stressed. And just finally, I would say, you're never alone. There are always people to help you, and you'd be surprised, by you opening up, how many other people you will probably help as well. So thank you so much for for sharing your story. I know there's some very difficult topics in there for you to revisit. But again, you have shown through adversity what you've created and the good that has come out of that, and is actually your father's legacy. That's how you can look at it, that you still remember him every day and talk about him on a regular basis because of the impact that he had on you. And although that might have been detrimental, you've turned it into something really positive to help others.
Thank you for saying that. And thank you for all your beautiful words of wisdom. If people want to find out more about what you do, or indeed hire you to be a speaker at their upcoming event, where can they find out more information?
So on Instagram, Sally Orange MBE, or on website, just sallyorange.com, or Facebook, Sally Orange. There aren't many Sally Oranges, you'll be pleased to hear.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sally. Looking forward to seeing what's next for you, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lynda. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for listening to our conversation with Sally Orange. If you've been struggling in silence and feeling like you have to hold it all together, or wondering if it's okay not to be okay, and it absolutely is, I hope this episode reminded you that you're not alone, and that asking for help is one of the bravest and most courageous things you can do. Links are in the episode notes to learn more about Sally's work, and indeed companies that can really help you in times of need. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, please reach out. There are people ready to listen.
That's it for today's episode of P.S I Love Me. I hope you've learned some interesting nuggets to weave into your everyday life to feel a little lighter, brighter, and inspired. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It helps more high-achieving women like yourselves to find us. And don't forget, wherever you are at in life, you are more than enough.